Welcome everyone to Choice Conversations, the podcast dedicated to helping you improve your life, one choice at a time. I'm your host, Chris Stefanik. Let's do this. Hey gang. I was recently a guest on The Senior Zone with Shawn Perry, and I thought you might be interested in hearing it. On this show, I talk about my areas of expertise as a coach and counselor, which is habit formation and overcoming self-sabotage. And the reason I focus on these areas I talk about on the show is basically I think it's the area where people need the most help, where they see the biggest bang for the buck, in my experience. It's the area where you have the most power to change your life for the better. It certainly was the case with me and what I found with my clients. So check it out. Kind of cool to be on the actual radio. The Senior Zone plays on WYCB, a radio station in Washington, D.C., with a pretty large audience. And it's not my first time being on the radio, but every time I'm on, it's just kind of cool. I know that radio is a dying technology and podcasts are the future. The opportunity, at least with podcasts, to reach a wider audience, and it's up there forever. Where on the radio, it's fleeting. If you're not listening while the time when the show's playing, then it's gone. But I don't know. I guess growing up in the 80s, before the internet was a thing and all that, it's always seemed more validating, more for real to say when I'm on the radio. It sounds more impressive when I'm talking to old people. Yeah, I'm on the radio as opposed to being on a podcast for some reason. So anyway, it was always great to be a guest on somebody's show. Before I bring you that interview, if you would like my guidebook on how to turn arguments into discussions, go to discussions.choiceconversations.com. It's free. It's short. Lots of powerful tricks in there to help you turn those arguments around, which is a tremendous tool to have in this world. So it's aimed at people that are in a relationship with a significant other, but many of the communication skills that are in this guidebook are applicable to any relationship you might have. So check it out. Discussions.choiceconversations.com. All right, now here's my appearance on The Senior Zone.
Hello, Chris. Are you there?
I'm here.
Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. It seems to be a little delay in our call. Let me introduce you, properly introduce you to our listeners, Chris. Chris Stefanik is the host of the personal development podcast, Choice Conversations. As a life coach and self-improvement enthusiast, Chris is passionate about helping people to grow in all areas of their life, be it relationships, health, career, and more. His primary areas of expertise lie in habit formation and overcoming self-sabotage. And Chris, that couldn't apply more to me over a significant portion of my life, self-sabotage. But I want to talk about habit formation today. So again, good morning, sir.
Yeah, good morning. Glad to be here.
Gotcha. So let's talk about you and introduce you to our listeners. We have a few minutes. How did you get on this journey, or find this point in your life of talking about, habit formation and overcoming, the things that we do to our own selves?
Well, it wasn't an easy or a short path, I'll tell you that, Shawn. So I was on a quest of personal growth. I hit rock bottom, and I went through what I call my awakening. My wife calls it midlife crisis. I prefer the term awakening, but it's just where I reached that point where I was in so much pain that something had to change. And so I started looking around for answers and discovered personal development. And after reading hundreds of books and listening to thousands of podcasts, thousands of hours of podcasts, probably thousands of podcasts as well, I took away a lot of good advice, but some of it was better than others. And what I really found to be the most effective was those two things that I chose to specialize in, because I found them to be the most powerful in my own life. And now that I have coaching clients in their lives as well, and that's working on habit formation and working on self-sabotage.
Yeah. Oftentimes, go ahead. I'm sorry, Chris.
I was just going to say, because basically what I've discovered is it seems like most of the time people know what it is they should be doing. If you want to lose weight, you shouldn't eat that piece of cake. You know what I mean? Most of the time people, their problem is not one of lacking knowledge. It's lacking the ability to implement that knowledge.
Yeah. Discipline.
And that's where, right. So self-sabotage comes in, not having healthy habits. Is a big thing. So
let's talk about, habits. What are habits, and why are they important to have or not have?
Sure. So right. Let's see if I can come up with a better definition than habits are something that you do habitually. That's pretty circular.
Right.
So I guess habits, I would say habit is something that you do without thinking. It's just automatic for you. It's one of those, like, most people don't need to think when they're driving. After you first learn to drive, you could pretty much, the car just kind of drives itself. We've all had that experience of, maybe you're listening to a really engaging podcast or you're in a deep conversation while you're driving down the road. And then the next thing you know, you're like, how did I get to my house? Like, I don't remember driving here at all. But yet you manage to skillfully drive and avoid accidents and, the whole thing, it's because it's come up. It's like, it's on autopilot, right? So that's a habit, is just something where it's become ingrained. You formed a pattern in your brain that it happens without you needing effort to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the real key, because if you don't have a habit, what you need to make something happen is willpower. Yeah. And the problem is willpower is a limited resource, and you only have so much before it runs out. And then, at that point, then you're falling off the wagon.
Yeah, unless there's a willpower gas station, and then you can go and fill up somewhere. Right, now, right. Would you say, that willpower is one of the components of a habit? And if not, then what are the components of a habit?
It's maybe a component in habit formation. Mm-hmm. You're going to need some willpower up front to implement the habit. But then once the habit's in place, the whole idea is getting rid of the need to have willpower to do it. Then it's automatic. Yeah. You don't have to think about it.
Yeah, and that's where most of us, including myself, over the course of my lifetime, where you fail in that first stage. You don't get to that point where you're not able to think about it. It's in that phase where you do need willpower just to get you through and into that phase of, okay, now I got it. I'm on autopilot. But most of us don't get there. Or if we get there, we don't stay there for long.
Right.
So I have some questions for you, Chris. This came from our listeners. I reached out to my listeners as I was preparing for today's discussion, and I have some listener questions for you. And first is, and I won't give. She didn't want me to give a name, but first is, how would you advise someone on how to overcome a bad habit?
That's a great question. So, The way, first I have to kind of take a step back and evaluate what are the components of a habit. So they've done some research on this, and they found that basically a habit has three components. It has a trigger, then there's the actual habit itself, the behavior, and then there's a reward at the end. And the way to think about this best is if you think about how you train a dog. If any of your listeners have dogs, they'll get this. What you do is there's the trigger is you give the command, then you get them to do the habit, do the trick rather, and then you give them a reward. And what happens is that reward, there's this thing happens in the brain where when you get the reward, the brain says, oh, this is a good thing. Whenever this trigger happens, I should do this. And it reinforces this whole cycle of these three things. You have a trigger, that, and then, so maybe you get stressed out. That's your trigger. And then you go smoke, and then you get that nicotine hit, and that's the reward, right? Mm-hmm. So that's an example. And the interesting thing is, once you've actually got the habit in place, you can remove the reward, and you'll keep continuing the habit. So like after you've got a dog trained, you don't need to give them treats afterwards. They'll keep doing it without giving them treats anymore.
Right.
So, and this is the same way. We're all mammals. The same thing works with humans as well. to go back to the listener's question of how do you break a bad habit? That pattern is in there of trigger, the habit itself, the activity, reward. That pattern is etched very deeply in your brain. And what if you just try to break a habit, what ends up without like replacing it with a new habit, intentionally replacing it with a new habit, you'll replace it with a habit anyway, or you'll just fall back to the old habit. So what I always teach my coaching clients is to choose what habit you want to replace that with. Figure out what your triggers are. Figure out what your reward is. Although the reward itself isn't as important as the trigger is the big thing. So say when you get stressed out, and then you normally go for a smoke break. Okay, recognize that and say, okay, whenever I get stressed out, I'm going to do something, a healthy habit to replace that with. So when I feel myself getting stressed out, maybe I'm going to go for a short walk. Mm-hmm. And then you got to find some way to like give yourself a reward for that. So it could be, maybe you have like a favorite podcast or like a favorite comedian you like, and you listen to that on your phone. You allow yourself to only listen to it when you go on this walks, when you're getting that stress relief. And so then you kind of look forward to it. You're like, oh man, I want to hear what's the latest episode of this podcast, or I want to hear that was really funny. I want to hear the next joke, or whatever it is. There's maybe you're just really mindful on your walk of taking the time to appreciate nature, the beauty of nature and things around you.
Gotcha.
There's a million things it could be. It's really like only limited by your imagination, but it's only a reward if you're consciously taking it in and enjoying it as a reward. So like you might be out walking in nature and there's beautiful nature all around you, but if you're not recognizing, that the beauty is around you, if you're not taking the time to smell the roses, it doesn't register in your brain as a reward. So you need to really intentionally say, this is awesome that I'm out here walking around. Look at what a great life I have. Look at these, this is really beautiful.
Yeah.
So that's the way to do it.
Yeah. Gotcha. So at the top of our discussion, I mentioned, to our listeners that, your primary area of expertise was in habit formation as well as overcoming, self-sabotage. And so my next question comes from our listener in Laurel, Maryland, Mrs. Janet Smith. And she asked, why do we, as I guess human beings, willfully and consciously engage in self-destructive habits while ignoring our better judgment?
That is a great question. So this all stems back to childhood trauma, actually. In my experience, all of it all stems back to childhood trauma. And it's actually your subconscious, while it's self-sabotaging you, while it's like you feel like it's ruining your life, why am I doing this? It's actually trying to help you. It's actually well-intended, just misguided.
Yeah.
So let me give you an example. Say you're somebody that's like a compulsive eater. And again, it's like something triggers you. Maybe you got in an argument with your spouse and there's some emotions coming up. And you then go eat a piece of cake or something like that, right? Or you go binge eat. You're doing that to medicate. I mean, it's an addiction. It's a food addiction, right? This actually applies to any addiction, be it, drugs and alcohol, gambling, socially accepted addictions like being a workaholic or being addicted to food. These things are, there's addicts all around us, and only some of them are like criticized for being like, hey, you're an addict, you need to get help. But people medicate in different ways. So what's going on in your subconscious is there's a part of you in your subconscious that says, say you get in an argument with your spouse and some emotions are starting to come up that are maybe really powerful, really strong. It's something that was maybe the seeds of it are in your childhood. Probably not maybe, almost certainly it's the seeds of it in your childhood. And this part of you says, Chris, my landline's ringing. Let me go in another room here. Actually, I can mute that from here. My apologies.
That's okay. Okay. And while you're answering that question, go ahead, Chris.
I was just going to say, so what happens is the part of your subconscious mind says, Chris, you're not capable of dealing with this pain. This pain's going to be too much for it. It's going to overwhelm you. You might jump out a window if you have to deal with this pain. You might, maybe you'll get angry if you deal with this pain and go hurt yourself or hurt somebody else and get in a lot of trouble. This is no good. You cannot deal with this pain. So let me distract you from that. So go eat that piece of cake. Look, don't pay attention to this pain. Go eat that piece of cake. Oh, don't pay attention to that pain. Go work, 80 hours a week. Don't, whatever it is your addiction is.
Right.
It's distracting you from the pain because your subconscious thinks you can't handle it. So it actually thinks it's looking out for you. It thinks, hey, if I let Chris handle his pain, then he's not gonna be able to handle it. He's gonna jump out a window. So it's really looking out for you. It really is.
Gotcha.
It's just misguided.
Chris, I want to switch gears real quick. We only have 2 minutes to go. From your experience in this habit formation space that you're in for our seniors here, do you know of any, say, low tech or maybe even high tech ways to track progress of one's habits? Are there any apps out there, websites, gadgets that one can use to, track and monitor their habits as they're trying to, adjust or make new habits or put ones in place?
Yeah, there are, but I don't use them, so I don't know what they are off the top of my head. But I've heard other people in the personal development space talking about them. Mm-hmm. What I'll tell you, what I use is just my calendar on my phone. I have all kinds of things, reminders in my calendar. Hey, go walk the dog. Hey, go tell my wife that, how much I appreciate her. Hey, do this or that. I mean, I literally have like reminders that are going off periodically throughout the day because there's things that I want to do every day. And I just pick a time. What's the most logical time for me to do this? Put a reminder in my calendar, and then, my phone beeps. I look down and be like, oh, yep, time to go tell my wife, what I'm grateful for about her today. And that works really great. And, some days every time I get a notification, I don't act on it, but that's okay. As long as most of the time I am. Most of the time I'm moving in a positive direction.
Gotcha. Chris, I have to let you go. Are there any parting words, any last remarks you want to make to our senior listeners?
Just, if they enjoyed what I had to say, come check me out at choiceconversations.com. And there's a lot more stuff like this, like what I was talking about today. You'll find it there.
Gotcha. We've been speaking with Chris Stefanik. He is host of the personal development podcast, Choice Conversations. You, again, can find him on choiceconversations.com. That's a website, folks, choiceconversations.com. Chris, thank you, my friend. Have a blessed day.
All right. You do the same.
All right. Take care.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that episode. A brief little window into my thoughts on my expertise, habit formation, and overcoming self-sabotage. Thanks so much, Shawn Perry, for having me on. It's an honor anytime somebody invites me to be on their show. Really appreciate it. If you would like some help, the best thing that you can do is to sign up for one-on-one coaching. Email me at chris@choiceconversations.com. That's all lowercase, chris@choiceconversations.com. And we'll get you scheduled for an appointment. That is the single best way to turn things around, if you're hitting a roadblock. So shoot me an email. All right, thank you so much. Have a great day. Or not. The choice is yours.